Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Ever had that moment when you're wandering around trying to find something you just know you saw a minute ago?
Uh-huh. Happens to me all the time.
Well, imagine if your favorite sugary drink or, that comforting bag of salty snacks might be subtly making those moments happen more often. We're diving into some surprising new research today. It looks at this unexpected link between the foods we enjoy and, well, our brain's ability to navigate the world around us.
That's right. In this deep dive, we're exploring how diets high in fat and high in sugar could be affecting our cognitive function.
And specifically?
Specifically, our spatial navigation, that internal GPS, you could say, that helps us understand where we are and how to get around.
Okay.
We'll be unpacking the findings of a recent study. It was published in the International Journal of Obesity, and also looking at some insights from the University of Sydney to understand this connection better.
Right. So our goal today is really to cut through the science, get to the core insights from this research.
Yeah.
We want everyone listening to understand what this study discovered, why it matters for keeping your brain sharp, and, what the experts are saying about it all.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly were these researchers trying to figure out? What was the main question?
Well, the main question they wanted to answer was whether a diet rich in high-fat and high-sugar foods, which is, let's face it, pretty common in many Western countries, actually impacts our ability to navigate and remember spaces.
Okay, that's specific skill.
Exactly. And, this wasn't a totally new idea. Previous studies had sort of connected these types of diets to broader issues with thinking and memory.
Right, I've heard about that.
And also, research in animal models, like rats and mice, had indicated that these diets could affect the hippocampus.
The hippocampus. Okay, remind us what that does again.
It's a really crucial area in the brain for both memory formation and spatial tasks, like learning your way around.
Got it.
So this new study aimed to see if they could find similar effects in people.
And how did they go about investigating this? Who did they look at?
They recruited 55 university students, actually, from the University of Sydney, aged between 18 and 38.
Young adults, then.
Exactly. And to get a handle on their diets, the students filled out these detailed questionnaires.
Okay.
These asked how often they'd consumed 25 different foods known to be high in fat and high in sugar over the past year.
A whole year's worth of recall.
Yeah, it's a common method, though we can talk about limitations later. They also reported how much added sugar they consumed each week. And this info allowed the researchers to calculate something called a dietary fat and free sugar short score for each person.
Right, a DFS score.
Yep, which gave them measures of fat intake, sugar intake, and sort of their total combined intake of these kinds of foods.
Okay, so they got a picture of what these young adults were typically eating. What did they do next to test their brain power?
They used a couple of key cognitive tests. First up, for spatial navigation skills, participants had to navigate through a computer-generated virtual reality maze.
Oh, like a video game.
Sort of, yeah. The goal was to locate a hidden treasure chest. They did this over 6 training sessions.
Training sessions.
And the maze had various landmarks around it, to help them get their bearings.
Makes sense.
Then, for the 7th test trial, the treasure chest was gone, removed.
The memory test.
Exactly. Participants had to rely on their memory of those landmarks to indicate where they thought the treasure had been.
And how did they measure how well they did?
The researchers measured the distance, how far off their marked location was from the actual spot where the treasure used to be.
Okay, accuracy. And you mentioned another test.
Yes. They also included another task. It's called a backward digit span task.
Backward digit span. What does that measure?
That one assesses working memory. Essentially, your ability to hold and manipulate information in your mind for a short time, like remembering a phone number backwards.
Right. Why include that?
Well, the researchers wanted to be sure that if they saw any effects on the maze navigation, it wasn't just because of, say, a general decline in overall cognitive abilities.
Okay. To isolate the spatial effect.
Precisely. By testing working memory separately, they could try to pin down the specific impact of diet on spatial skills. Oh, and they also recorded everyone's body mass index, their BMI.
Right. So diet questionnaires, virtual maze navigation and memory, working memory test, and body mass index. Got it. What were the key things they discovered? What jumped out?
Well, the results showed a pretty significant connection between what the participants reported eating and how well they remembered where that treasure chest was.
Okay.
Those who reported higher intakes of fatty and sugary foods They were less accurate.
Yeah.
They marked the location further away from the real spot in that final memory test.
Interesting. And that held up even when considering other factors.
Yes, and this is important. This connection remained even after the researchers statistically accounted for their working memory abilities and their body mass index.
Wow. So it wasn't just about general memory or weight. That is quite interesting. Were there any other significant findings?
Yes, definitely. During those initial training sessions, remember when participants were learning the maze layout? Well, those students with higher scores for fat, sugar, and the total DFS score, they showed slower rates of improvement. Their learning curves were flatter. Meaning it seemed they weren't learning the maze as efficiently or as quickly as those who ate fewer of those high-fat, high-sugar foods.
So it wasn't just about remembering later. They actually had more difficulty learning the spatial layout in the first place. That sounds like a pretty fundamental impact.
Exactly. It suggests an effect on the learning process itself. And the study also found a statistically significant positive correlation. Basically, a clear link between higher scores for fat intake and the total score, and a greater distance from the target in that memory test.
So in simpler terms?
In simpler terms, the more of these fatty and sugary foods people reported eating, the worse their spatial memory seemed to be. It wasn't just a tiny difference, there was a clear trend there.
These findings sound quite important. What do they really suggest about how our diets are affecting our brains? What are the implications here?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways, really, is that our dietary choices can affect our brain health even in young adulthood.
Right, not just later in life.
Exactly. This is a period when we usually think of our cognitive abilities as being, at their peak. This research suggests the impact isn't just something that crops up in middle age or older adults. It could be happening much earlier.
So what we're eating today, right now, could be having a more immediate effect on specific brain functions than we might have thought.
That's a really crucial point. The study indicates that diet can potentially have a relatively immediate impact on specific cognitive skills, like the spatial navigation piece.
And it points back to that brain region you mentioned.
It reinforces the idea that the hippocampus, that area vital for spatial memory and learning, might be particularly vulnerable to the effects of these high-fat, high-sugar diets. It's like that part of our brain's machinery is especially sensitive to this type of, fuel.
And you mentioned earlier that this connection remained even after they considered body mass index. Why is that particularly noteworthy?
That's a really interesting aspect, I think. It suggests that the effects on cognitive function might not simply be a consequence of gaining weight. It's possible, perhaps likely, that these dietary components, the fats, the sugars, are directly impacting the brain itself. And these effects could be occurring even before any significant changes in body weight become obvious.
So the brain could be reacting sort of independently of overall weight changes.
That's what this hints at, yes. It's like a direct effect on brain mechanisms.
And the fact that they controlled for working memory, that tells us the difficulties in the maze weren't just down to people being generally slower thinkers, right?
Precisely. By accounting for working memory, the researchers could strengthen the argument that the observed difficulties in spatial navigation were specific to that ability. It wasn't just a reflection of a broader decline in cognitive functions. It helps pinpoint where the potential impact lies.
Okay. But of course, with any research, it's important to talk about the limitations. No study is perfect.
Yeah.
What are some of the things we need to keep in mind when looking at these findings?
Absolutely. There are several limitations to consider here. Firstly, the participants were all university students.
Right, you mentioned that.
Which is a fairly specific group. They might be generally healthier, maybe have different eating habits compared to the wider population.
So maybe not fully representative.
Exactly. The researchers themselves acknowledged this and suggested the impact of diet on spatial navigation might actually be even more pronounced in a more diverse general population sample.
So what they saw might even be underestimating the effect.
It's possible, yes. That's something to consider.
Okay, that's an important point about the group studied. What else should we keep in mind?
Well, the study design itself was correlational.
Meaning?
Meaning it shows an association, a relationship between diet and spatial navigation, but it doesn't definitively prove that the diet causes the poorer navigation skills. Correlation isn't causation, as they say.
Right, so we see a link, but can't be 100% sure one directly causes the other from this study alone.
Correct. Now, animal studies do strongly suggest a causal link, and research has shown that changing the diet back in rodents can improve these spatial impairments.
Ah, okay.
But to confirm this cause and effect relationship in humans, we'd ideally need intervention studies where researchers directly control people's diets over time.
Which are much harder to do, I imagine.
Much harder, yes. So while these findings are definitely suggestive and align with other research, we can't say for certain from this specific study that the high-fat, high-sugar diet directly caused the navigation issues.
Got it. Correlation, not necessarily causation yet in humans. Any other limitations?
Another one was the dropout rate. A significant number of participants, around 39%, actually had to withdraw.
Why was that?
They experienced motion sickness from the virtual reality environment.
Oh, right. VR can do that.
It can. And this high dropout rate could potentially have introduced some bias in the final group whose data was analyzed. Maybe the people who remained were different in some systematic way.
That's a possibility.
And finally, the dietary information relied on self-reporting. People had to remember what they ate over the past year.
Yeah, I can barely remember what I ate yesterday.
Exactly. So there's always the potential for recall bias. People might not remember accurately, or they might subconsciously report eating healthier than they actually did.
Okay, so student sample, correlational design, VR dropouts, and self-reported diet recall. Those are all important factors to keep in the back of our minds.
Definitely. They provide context for the findings.
Now let's bring in the lead researcher's perspective, Dr. Tran. What were his key takeaways from this work?
Well, Dr. Tran emphasized that the findings do point towards a negative impact of these high-fat, high-sugar diets on certain aspects of cognitive function.
Right.
And he believes these effects are likely centered in the hippocampus, that memory and navigation hub we talked about.
Okay, so he sees a real connection there.
Yes, but he also offered a more positive note, which I think is important. He suggested that these effects are likely reversible.
Oh, really? Reversible how?
With changes in diet. He indicated that improving your diet could potentially lead to improvements in these special navigation abilities.
Ah, so it's not necessarily a permanent sentence, so to speak.
Exactly. It offers some hope that dietary changes can make a difference. It's not necessarily irreversible damage.
That's definitely encouraging. What else did Dr. Tran highlight?
He also sort of reiterated the point about the study group that while it was university students and maybe not fully representative, the findings probably still have broader implications.
That the effect might be even stronger elsewhere.
Potentially, yes. That the impact could be even stronger in the general population. And he also underscored the already well-established risks of these kinds of diet.
For physical health, you mean?
Right, for physical health and also for age-related cognitive decline later in life. He added that this research provides sort of more evidence for why diet is important for brain health even much earlier in young adulthood.
So it just reinforces that message.
Right.
What we eat matters for our brains, not just our bodies, and at pretty much all stages of life.
That sums it up well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like, despite those limitations we discussed, this study really offers some valuable food for thought, pardon the pun.
It certainly does.
So wrapping this up, what's the main message for our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I think the core message is that this research adds to a growing body of knowledge suggesting our dietary choices significantly impact our brain health. And this impact can potentially be seen even in younger adults and in very specific cognitive abilities like spatial navigation. Well, more research is definitely needed to nail down the exact cause and effect relationships in humans. This study highlights the potential downside of diets consistently high in fat and sugar for our brain's ability to navigate and remember spatial information.
And it points towards the hippocampus as being particularly sensitive.
That seems to be a key area, yes. So ultimately, it's another reminder that fueling our bodies well really does mean fueling our brains well, too. The two are intricately connected.
This definitely gives us something to think about, doesn't it? So for everyone listening, considering this connection between your diet and your brain's ability to navigate your world, maybe find your keys, maybe find your way in a new city, what small step could you maybe take today?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be huge.
Exactly. Maybe it's just being a little more conscious of the refined sugars, the saturated fats that might be sneaking into your daily meals or snacks. This isn't about suggesting huge overnight drastic changes.
No, definitely not.
But maybe just about making some small mindful choices to nourish that incredible brain of yours, for all the adventures and explorations, both real and imagined, that lie ahead.
Well said. Fueling future explorations. I like that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Do Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.